Hello again. In this video we want to share with you of when we took another trip in the Algarve. This time we head west and go to Silves, then up into the mountains, which incidentally are the highest on the Algarve, and then on to what we are informed the Romans used to call the end of the world, and then finally stopping in the city of Lagos. The first location we arrived at was the city of Silves. The reason for this was because here there is a castle, fortress, which was well worth a look. The cost of the trip doesn't pay for entry to the castle. However, this is not that much, and the tickets can also include the associated archaeological museum. Even less for pensioners and students and children. When we left the coach, we went through the market and were impressed by the products being sold here. From local produce and handcrafted wares, it was both colourful and noisy. The castle dates back to the Middle Ages and classified as possibly the best example of Arab military building in the whole of Portugal. It sits at the top of the highest point in the city, which has a wonderful view over the countryside, and I am told you can even see the Atlantic Ocean way over to the south, nearly 10 kilometres away. The Castelo de Silves may sit on the site of an even older fort, which has been buried since the times before Christ. When the Romans came, they redeveloped the site, and it was later occupied by the Visigoths, after which it was the Moors who actually built what we see today. The fortress covers an area of approximately 12,000 square meters. The walls are constructed with packed earth, which is then coated with sandstone rock that they found locally. Evidence of the different occupations has been found in the smaller cistern or well. Here within the walls and grounds of the castle, there is a huge space which is home to a large water storage system. This aljibe, as it is called in Spanish, is the cistern of Mora. It's one of two cisterns, the other being called the cistern dos Seias. Apparently the aljibe was made to cope with the demand for water that grew, and also to cope with the drier spells when water was in short supply. You can walk around and view the archaeological work that has been carried out, and even go into the cistern, which is actually very large, measures some 20 by 16 meters and is 7 meters from floor to ceiling. The water catchment from rainwater in the large underground cistern was used right up until the 1920s to supply the surrounding homes. King Sancho I of Portugal, a statue of whom is outside the entrance to the castle, was supported by a much larger force of crusaders, managed to capture the castle in 1189. But then in 1191 it was retaken by the Muslims. It was not until the 13th century that in the reign of Alfonso III of Portugal that the fortress was taken finally from the Muslims by the Portuguese. Now, there is a cafe in which you can refresh yourself in an area which has gardens that you can walk through. Very close to the fortress is the Cathedral of Silves, which was not opened for tourists at the time we were there. The larger white painted cathedral is also in a position of prominence overlooking the town. The archaeological museum is very close by as well, and because it is the highest point in the city, the walk back to the coach was made easier by the downhill grade. We went back through the market and stopped to look at a decorated ball covered in orange crochet. The next stop was going to be in the mountains. and as we travelled we went up into some cloud which was actually very thick in places. These mountains are called the Serra de Monchique, and our destination was to stop at a winery, and then on our way back down we would take a short stop for lunch. As we ascended, we were able to see cork trees, which of course are used for sealing wine and port bottles, as well as making many souvenirs. Quarries were also along the route, where the cut stones were very neatly stacked on top of each other. We passed through some villages and towns as we were going along the windy roads. The vegetation was lush and the air cool. At the winery itself, which is called Artesanato Santo Antonio, we left the bus and were taken into a shop. It was a very small gift shop, but we followed the guide through to the main area where they sold clothes and various items, and of course the wine. Some of the drinks being sold were very powerful, as much as 48% by volume. They were happy to give us a sample in a small cup. In fact, they were very pleasant to taste and to swallow. There wasn't much else to do, so we got back on the bus and travelled down to have lunch, still in the mountains. On the way down afterwards, we were able to look down into the deep valleys where the fog was making the surfaces very wet. Eventually, we were down and heading westwards again towards the end of the world. This, we are told, is what the Romans called it. For them, there was nothing west of this point. The Atlantic Ocean stretches out for thousands of miles towards the Americas. We arrived here to see a lighthouse in a complex at the end of a spit of land. Looking out from the top of these high cliffs and warning sailors of the dangers. This is called Faro do Cabo de São Vicente, or Cabo de São Vicente Lighthouse. Those dangers, however, are not just for sailors, but for those who come here to enjoy the wild coastline views. The lighthouse is behind fortress-like stone walls, and I am not sure how old these are, but it is kept in very good shape by the authorities. Many people do go very close to the cliff edge, and as a child I was told never to do so. So I will say to you, be very careful. Walking around the area, we noticed that there were many crocus-like flowers that, whilst being windswept, were flourishing here between the rocks. These hardy plants were everywhere. We appreciated the chance to get out for a walk and have some fresh air, literally blown in from the Atlantic, feeling the warm sun and seeing the swells off the sea from the top here, which was very exposed to the elements. From here we passed by Sagres on our way to Lagos. Now, Sagres is the site of a historic naval training centre and fortress which was developed in the 15th century, the days of discovery as they are known, when Portugal was a large naval power, finding distant lands and settling into places like Brazil and Africa. It was built by Infant Dom Henry the Navigator, who died here in 1460. Later, the fortress was attacked by Sir Francis Drake during the wars between England and Spain, who at that time had control of Portugal. We didn't stop to take a look around, and so we carried on to Lagos. Now, today, Lagos is a thriving city on the Algarve in Portugal, and rumour has it it was first settled 2000 years before Christ. It has, in the time since then, been under the control of various powers, and just like Silves, that includes Romans and Muslims. Lagos is a seaport and was very much involved in the trades and expansion of the Portuguese in the age of discoveries. After the Great Lisbon earthquake, it lost its status when Faro became more important and also the main city on the Algarve. Having been held back by the French wars and the Portuguese civil wars, it is these days a major player in tourism. There is, however, a blot on this city's history. Maybe not considered as such in the 15th century, it was here in the 1440s that after gaining territories in West Africa, the first African slaves were brought into this port and sold through the market. This was the start of the very abhorrent slave trade in Europe that persisted for centuries. A special market building was established here, which is now a museum of slavery, and that opened in 2016. Lagos lost the slavery trade through a royal decree in 1512. The then king decreed that all slaves had to be brought into Portugal through Lisbon. Now, with that trade behind us, the city is quite pleasant and has many interesting features. The busy narrow streets and the numerous shops and cafes, it makes it something for just about anyone to enjoy. Along with other places we visited, on the Algarve there was a wealth of sculptures and street art. There was even a stall selling hot chestnuts, from which we saw was There was a stall selling hot chestnuts, and from what we saw, this was very popular. It didn't feel as though we had been here very long before we had to go back and meet the coach to go back to Albufeira and our hotel. We're Rod and Mariana. We hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please click the like button, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe.